Yeah, for this one, we're going to first start out with the sending my Patreon information into the chat, and next we're going to go and we're going to start talking about this. Is basically what we're going to be going on with this is trying to go over the ideas of MMT economics and why people tend to support it, and why they tend to get this idea behind it, and are totally delusional in any type of ideas when they tend to come up when people tend to come up with their points. They tend to break through all of the economic points of their theory. And the only I basically come up with two different possibilities. Number one is this is the first one. This would be of the pointing out the that they love their pie in the sky proposals, and that they know that without massive amounts of funding it cannot work. And since we know that funding can only come from taxation, loans, basically loaning money, or the actual ability to cause inflation, basically printing more money, that they know that we know that that's the only way that you can get that you can establish more and more programs that they know that basically to do this you'd actually have to change the way you believe. Now what they do is they create an idea, this new idea, which essentially ignores the ideas of inflation. They believe that they can it not only does it take it takes certain ideas of Keynesian economics of printing, but it basically does that on a massive scale. Now it does figure certain things on a little bit of it on a completely different scale than Keynesian economics, but it does this on but because it does this differently, because it separates the idea of just direct savings next to investment savings, which is completely insane, because it tends to want to interject how people treat their money, and what they're doing with it. Instead of actually how traditional economics just treats it as savings in general, instead of separating investment and savings, they tend to view savings in general as lumping investments with it, because that is traditional savings is in itself. Because when you're using savings, when it goes into banking, it is actually investment, because the bank is actually investing that money, and that's how it's making money. And so to actually, because when people are actually when people are marking things as savings, they're not putting the money into a jar and burying it into the yard. That is completely illegitimate, and that's not what's happening. The money is always being invested in one degree or another. So so to actually mark it as something separate would actually be pointless in any form of economics. But they're actually marking it as separate, which is actually how they're trying to get around with viewing these things and saying, see, we have savings here, and they're basically trying to market around with that, and trying to say that there's actual savings by actually marking different points and trying to offset different sections of the economy with their actual spending. Now, what ends up hitting is when they keep printing money with it, it eventually is going to even when they start, it eventually is going to surpass the amount of whatever investment and savings comes through in traditional savings, I should say. And it's going to happen because you're going to have the debt payments. You can't just stiff people on debt, and you're going to have to pay those people back because that is in essence more investment payments. And those people that you're investing with, they're going to those people that are investing in you as the government are going to expect that money back. You can't just stiff them, and they're not going to. If you keep diluting your currency, they're going to get mad because they're not going to get the value because the currency is going to keep getting debased, and it's going to keep losing value. And they're not, and just like any type of cryptocurrency that's not against that does not go against inflation, when you start adding more and more to the mix, it's going to start losing value. And we've actually seen that when we start to look at the actual US dollar, the US dollar has lost 97% of its value over time since we've actually had central banking. And this is because of its excessive printing, because we followed the Keynesian model. And that's what ends up happening. And if we go to this MMT model, it's going to probably lose at least 2 point whatever percent of its leftover spending value from what it was when we established the central bank in 1913. And this is something that needs to be understood. Now, it's only to get these pie-in-the-sky proposals, and that's what I think a good portion of these things are, and we need to understand that in the first place. And I think that's where a lot of these things are, and they want to believe in it 100%. And I think this is something that's very, very important to these people. And they're willing to fight to basically make it look real, not understanding that this is basically going to cause hyperinflation, and you're basically going to copy what they have out in Venezuela. Now, Venezuela is not going to be quite as bad because the one thing is because they are in a Keynesian system, they are aware of that inflation. Now they might undergrade it for political reasons, but they are still aware of that inflation rate. The problem of MMT is they're going to completely ignore that inflation rate because they're going to state that it is completely negligible when computing these things out. Because when looking at economic statistics, they're going to state that is a negligible point to compute, because they believe that the government actually controls money. This is one of the things that actually distinguishes it from the actual other forms of the economic theories. Every other economic theory says that money comes actually from the actual marketplace, and that's where the money actually derives from. While the government might actually make a currency, might print a currency, they are not the controllers of the wealth at all. They have no control over that wealth. This is why they must make taxation, why they must do taxation, why they must do inflation, why they must do the loans themselves. Otherwise, they would actually not have any funds, because without these, they would not get any money in, because they don't control that wealth. That's just and this is the way it's been since the start of governments themselves. And that's one thing, if you look at history, that MMT ignores. And when we go to the second part, we understand is it could also be that could also be the something on the second part, which is that there is that possibility that people are just doing it because it's a radical thought, and that's they're doing it because it just doesn't fit into the normal situation of what we see economics fitting into. And that is a very good possibility. And when we see that, we could see the fact that we could see that that is a good possibility that people are supporting it because of that. And while it is a good majority on the first point of it, just basically to support their plans of what they want for proposals on bills, there is a good portion of people who probably want it because it's something completely different economically, and they want to basically tear down this idea of traditional economics of what they know. And so they would rather have and it does fit into the idea of socialism because it in itself is, if you look at the points, it does fit to the government owning all of the wealth. When you understand that, that is essentially your ideas of Marxism and being socialism or communism. And when you go at that point, it says that they would essentially divvy out that money. And that would essentially be on the idea of what they would propose. And that would be completely different for any of the market-based solutions that we've had to date. Either the more centralized, even the most centralized systems that are still have some bit of a awareness of a market, which even if you go as far as some of the Keynesian systems, to even as more the most free market systems, such as the Austrian theory, and which would be completely opposite, because it states that the money is not coming from the government but rather from the people. And even in historically, with the ideas of socialism, from even socialism and communism from the 20th century, even they went on theories that the money came from the people. And even for economic theories, and even with those economic theories, is they still were not going on these on this radical of an idea. So what they would have to go with is the idea of is confiscating money from those people, which is a completely different theory of what they were doing. Now, this theory essentially says that the government already owns that money and that they can divvy that money out, which is completely different, because they're the ones that essentially print the money, so it's essentially their property, which would essentially be completely different. And it really turns the economic uh, uh, it essentially turns economics on its head, because and essentially history on its head, because it doesn't it doesn't essentially take any keys from history nor economics at all. And this is where it kind of sits out on its own, and this is where I think you're getting people that are on this radical end to support this. Now, to see actual politicians support this is quite insane. I don't. This is why to see anybody do this without their reasoning to support the bills that they want is insane. That's why Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when we start to look at her, is for her to actually support this beyond it to support her Green New Deal, which is the only way that it could actually be applied, is actually quite insane. And I think that I think we need to I think we need to understand that what we're seeing here is that we are it's basically the what is it saying? It's basically set under the idea of trying to pass these proposals that really don't have a financial ability to pass. And that's really where we're sitting at with this, and why we're getting people to support it. Because when we start to look at what would happen in a realistic situation, we know that when we start to actually put it into play, we know that what happens in real life would actually happen under what would happen closest is under an Austrian system. And the Austrian theory is actually what ends up being closest to reality. And because it follows human nature, and that's kind of what we need to rely upon. So if we end up going down that road with these proposals, we need to understand what's going to happen is if we end up doing that plus MMT situations to pay for this, that would be hyperinflation. And because eventually you're going to be printing a lot, and it, even though it might not show that much in the CPI, we know what ends up happening when we start to look at the alternative inflation charts, which are probably the best way to view it. And we could see at the start that eventually, at the start, there was within the late 70s up until about 82, 83, it stayed stayed about the same, or about 1980 to about 82 or so. It stayed about the same for the inflation charts, which is the CPI, I should say. But compared to the alternatives. But what ended up happening is after this point, it ended up growing larger and larger and larger apart. And this is for political reasons. Now, because for the political party, they want to make sure that it doesn't look as bad as it really is. So you make the inflation look actually much lower, when it really is much higher. And this is why your inflation is going to go higher and the CPI is going to go lower. And when we're sitting at right now at somewhere around the level of about 9%, and it's showing somewhere around like 1 to 2% for inflation, and that should give you kind of a little bit of a key of where we're at. So we're about 1.5% right now, and yet the percentage is probably sitting somewhere on the level of 5%. Or no, sorry, it's probably sitting somewhere at a level of like 9% right now. And it's and it goes with the this should be an idea of what's going to happen, so you know that the idea is not going to change. That we're not going to get this and that we're not going to get this adjustment for that they're not going to do this that it's not going to be a legitimate adjustment when they do this, that even if it goes up, it's probably not going to be above a level of about 5%, because the highest it's been since since they've separated a decent amount was basically back in like 89, and that was about 6%. And that should be kind of that idea of where you're probably going to see it. Ever since the 90s with it, it's never approached, it's only approached above 5% once. And that should be kind of the idea of what you're going to see of it. And it's never going to hit 10% again under the CPI. But we know legitimately that it's probably going to go well above that, and it's potentially could be going into like the 20s and 30s and 40s for percentage wise for inflation very, very quickly. And that this could be within it could not take that long. Now, because we have a larger population base, it probably would take a little bit longer for this to happen with something of just in the line of something of the they would triple our amounts, such as like the Green New Deal, just adding something like that. It would probably do something of adding at least an inflation of probably making about 1.5 times of what we have right now. So you could pretty much be adding at least you're talking a good chunk onto your at least 10% onto your food prices right now of what you're paying right now, and it probably would go up from there. So if you go and if you go to the store and you're spending I'll go to my local store right now. Or at least the one where I can, well, at least one of them that I can look online. Let's look at I'll look at some produce. Okay, they have red bell peppers, 50 cents each. You could pretty much guarantee that's probably going to be going up at least 5 to 10 cents a piece. So it'd be going up. Now, that might not be seen as much. Um, um, Baby carrots about $1 a pound. You could pretty much guarantee that's probably going to be adding on another 10 to 20 cents a pound. But it's still, when you keep doing this, it adds up. And tomatoes currently at about 69 cents a pound. If you start to add that up, it probably is going to be going closer to $1 if and this would probably be on sale right now, so it would probably be going to at least $1 to $1.50 a pound, because of the prices. So cheaper things would probably go up even more. Red grapes, which are about $2 a pound, would probably go up even more, probably to $2.50 a pound. So I mean, the things like that would probably go up a little bit further with it, whereas like larger items like meat might not go up as much, except for the fact that when we look at it, is meat might actually is I shouldn't say meat with it, I should say more like fish with it, because she did say things against meat as well, I should say. So more fish is not going to go up as much. But meat will. Breads are not going to really go up as much. Breads aren't going to go up too much. But deli meats are going to be going up. Like, let's look at one of them. That we know is like beef. Here we go. An Angus roast beef, $12.99 a pound, right there. That's probably going to be near $20 a pound, if not more, because of what would actually be happening, and that's the whole problem. Beef, if we go there, we got 96% lean ground beef for $5.49 a pound. That's probably going to be at least $10 a pound. Beef tenderloin, $9.99 a pound, probably at least going to be $20 a pound, if not more. And these are the things that are going to be happening, and that's because of the impacts of the law. Now, seafood's probably not going to be quite as much going up, but it still will be going up because of inflation. Like we see, like fresh salmon, $5.49 a pound is probably going to be going to about $6.50 a pound. So everything will be going up because of all of those points, and that's something that needs to be understood under this, because you will have the inflation, and it will be going up year by year by year, and that's just going to be like on the first year. Within then you're going to see these things go up, and because of this, because you have this whole thing of wanting to ban cows, it's going to cause beef to go up through the roof, because she's going to want to put this whole big stigma on beef. So it's going to cause beef to basically be this taboo meat, and it's going to cause that to basically any beef in the store is going to go through the roof because of the way supply and demand goes. When it's going to cause there's going to be a whole big she's going to keep shorting the supply, and the demand's still going to be there, and that's going to cause the actual price to soar through the roof. And all it's just going to do in the overall is just hurt people, because a lot of people's diets in certain areas of the country are based off of beef, and there's certain areas in the country that can't get seafood, and the source of protein are going to be limited as well because of just the cost. And while people that are wealthy enough are going to be able to afford this, there's a lot of people who are not going to be, and that's what's going to happen. And it's going to be where people are going to essentially, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to starve to death because of going in this direction. And this is something, this is why I refer to it as a fantasy land, because it doesn't look at what's really going on. And that's why no other country that has ever tried to go in this direction. And this is really what we're finding. This is basically, it's a bunch of rich white liberals who end up supporting this. We're not finding many normal average people beyond people who are not exactly the brightest bricks in the wall and don't know much about economics to begin with that are actually supporting this. There's usually proponents of yay, I like socialism because it means everybody gets to share. They don't understand what it really means, and that's really what it really boils down to, and that's what needs to be understood. And that's why when it comes down to it, I think it's a bunch of stupid people who just don't understand anything of economics, and they really need to understand that if you want to get a better situation for people, you need to get an economic theory that's based on human nature, because that's the way you need to go naturally, because you're not going to get a system that's going to be fair if it's going to be based on only aiding people who are basically at the top in government. And that's what MMT does. MMT is basically, it's socialism. It's a Marxist system, and that's what it's set to be. And it doesn't fit to any market-based system because it's not designed to. And with the people that are supporting it, I think it's just basically supporting based on a rebellion of any market-based theory and any and their love of these pie-in-the-sky proposals that really cannot be paid in any legitimate way. And they don't want to face reality that it can't be paid in any other way. And so they're willing to basically grasp at any straws at being able to whatever type of economic theory says that they can pay for it. If there was an economic theory that said we had to throw clowns off of cliffs to pay for the Green New Deal, they would basically do it. And I think that's what we're at right now, and I think that's what we're talking about here. And they really don't care about what it means to pay for these insane deals. They would, they're almost at a point of desperation, because they believe in all of this hogwash. They don't even think about the science. Now, when we add the science of this thing, we know that carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. This actually causes plants to grow. Any person actually can break down the math. Humans and other animals give off carbon dioxide. This even includes fish. What ends up happening is when this comes off, is it ends up being picked up by plants. The plants take in said carbon dioxide. They give off the oxygen. Now they do this with it because they're looking for the carbon, and this is just a basic fact. This is the interaction. This is the actual interaction in the ecosystem between humans and between animals and plants, and it just happens. It doesn't matter if we're talking in an oceanic atmosphere or an oceanic ecosystem, or if we're talking on a terrestrial ecosystem, and it happens just the same. And it doesn't matter if we're talking basic, like if we're talking like a fox interacting with little short little plants, or if we're talking a human interacting with a tree. It happens just the same. And this is what they fail to react to, because they're believing this hogwash that CO2 is going to cause the end of the world, and they're believing this idea that CO2 from one source is different from another source. It doesn't matter. CO2 is CO2. It doesn't matter because a chemical compound is a chemical compound. It doesn't matter where it comes from. And this is where people need to understand this, is there's no difference from one chemical compound to the next chemical compound. They're all going to be the same no matter what source it comes from. Just like when, let's say we're dealing with water vapor. Water vapor from when you boil a pot, water vapor from when a company is making energy, could be nuclear energy, could be coal-based energy, could be whatever type of energy, could be like whatever type of whatever type of energy they're trying to develop, or could be out in the ocean when we had the water just steaming, and where it's hot and steam rises, and it naturally evaporates. And all those are the same. It's all water vapor. And it's all the same. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. Actually, the greatest source of water vapor is actually the oceans. And when we're talking about what they claim is greenhouse gas, the actual greatest source is the oceans. You don't see people asking you don't see people like Bill Nye calling fish climate science deniers. You don't see him asking for carbon taxes on fish. When's the last time you see Bill Nye start ridiculing yellowfin tuna? It doesn't happen, because this is a whole big bunch of BS, and that's why we need to understand this, because it's all about government control of people, and it doesn't boil down to any science. The science doesn't match up. And it's basically what causes weather change is when oceans of different temperatures move, and because you need to understand that of how energy is stored. Energy is stored in different forms. It either can be stored in solids, liquids, or gases. Gases do not have much ability to store energy. Liquids have a solid ability to store energy, and solids have the best ability to store energy, but solids do not move very well because the way the molecules move. The best ability for weather to actually be impacted is when we're talking about the actual point of liquids moving. And the best and what actually impacts a lot of weather is the oceans. When you have oceanic movement, this is what causes a lot of weather changes, and people need to stop ignoring this. And it's not because of all these other things. And you're not going to have all these other changes, and we need to stop all this hogwash about all of these other things. And we need to stop this kind of BS about the and about all these other forms of what we keep saying, oh, it's climate change, all this other garbage like this, because then we get people claiming about MMT economics, and we get them trying to stretch for them, and it ends up being bad for everyone. And they'll be willing to put everyone in a horrible economic situation because they're believing something that isn't true and that doesn't have any scientific basis. And they'll believe when people say when consensus means science. Consensus doesn't mean science, because there was originally a consensus that the world was flat. And we can obviously say that when we start measuring curvature, we can actually say that the world is not of the earth. We can actually say that the world is not flat. While we can't say it's an actual perfect sphere with it for obvious reasons, we have to say that it is somewhat of a curvature on the earth. And this is the whole point that we're looking at is MMT is really based on a lot of fear tactics, getting people to believe in a lot of these things, and it's getting people to stretch for whatever option that they can get to put their ideas through. And this is basically such an horrible idea to begin with. When you try to basically say this is the only way that our ideas can get through and make sense, you have to realize, well, what is MMT to begin with? Well, it's essentially ignoring all the facts of history of how money works. And if you have to do that, you're really basically barking down a road that really doesn't even make any sense anymore. And we need to understand that you need to go in the opposite direction and realize that I understand that our current system really sucks, but the fact is you need to understand that it can be fixed by basically understanding that the value of money should be dictated by the market. This is a real simple fix. Start getting rid of all the centralization. Don't go toward more centralization and make the problem worse. When you look at history, what actually made the problem worse? If it's centralization, don't go with more centralization. Go away from it. And these problems are easily fixed. When you see there's a problem, you see something cause the problem, you go away from the problem. It's real easy. Just like in a situation, if you're in an abusive relationship, you don't stay in if you're in an abusive relationship with a boyfriend, you don't say, "Hey, let's get married with it because I think it'll make it better." No, that's the exact opposite of what you do. You get away from that relationship because that's bad, and that's the same idea of what we're talking about here. This is basically making a thing work. You're basically going deeper into it by making it, which is going to make it worse. And I think this is basically what they don't understand. You're basically taking a situation which is bad and you're making it worse. And I'm basically going to end it here. If you like this, like, subscribe, click the notification bell on my page. Make sure to share it around social media. Make to your friends and everyone publicly. And check out my podcast on Facebook. It's Joe Singer's podcast. And then check out my Twitter page. It's at Big Joe 1221, and that's about it. I will see you guys later, probably for a podcast. That's about it. Bye, everyone.